Hello, dear listener. Welcome back to another long and quiet journey through history. Tonight, we'll travel to the shadows of ancient Egypt, to the sands that remember whispers and curses. Make yourself comfortable, turn the lights low, and let the stillness settle. Please subscribe if you haven't already. And now, let's begin. In the second millennium before our era, beyond the shimmer of Nile waters and the shadow of Thebes' towering pillars, there existed a queen whose name had been stricken from the royal records. Her name was once sung by priests and carved into sandstone with reverence, but was later chipped away, erased, lost to time, or hidden on purpose. Her name was Isetnofret II, or so the scattered pieces of limestone and whispers in forgotten scrolls suggest. She was not the principal queen of Ramses II. That was Nefertari, the favored, the beloved. But Isetnofret II held another kind of power, not the kind bestowed by beauty or diplomacy, but one that simmered in silence. Deep knowledge, perhaps, or something older, something darker. In her youth, Isetnofret was a priestess, raised in the temples of Hathor. She had eyes like obsidian and a voice that could lull the fiercest sandstorm. When she entered the court of Ramses II, she came not merely to serve, but to observe. She was known to keep scrolls in languages no one else in the palace could read. Rumors swirled among the concubines and servants that she spoke with the dead, that she did not sleep, that her reflection lagged behind her in polished bronze. When Nefertari died, unexpectedly, some said unnaturally, it was Isetnofret who held Ramses through his mourning, and it was she who took the black-lacquered crown of the royal consort. But while Nefertari's memory was immortalized in stone, Isetnofret's presence became a subject of unease. Even Ramses, known for his pride and fearlessness, began to age strangely during their years together. His letters from that time were shorter, stranger. The usual proclamations of victory and eternity were replaced by musings of shadows, dreams he could not shake. One scribe, who served in the court during this time, left behind a brittle papyrus, never meant to be read by others. In it, he described a night when he passed near the queen's chambers and heard two voices. One was Isetnofret's, the other was not Ramses, nor was it human. After Isetnofret's death, a quiet, unceremonious passing in the heat of summer, Ramses declared that no images of her were to remain in the temples. Her burial was not among the royal tombs. Instead, she was laid to rest in a hidden place, sealed with a name that was not hers. And that was the end of her for a time. Centuries passed, dynasties fell, the Nile shifted, sand reclaimed the temples and tombs. Isetnofret became a ghost of a whisper, until the 19th century, when explorers and grave robbers alike descended upon the Valley of the Kings with lanterns and greed. One such explorer was Edwin Clawthorne, an Englishman of means and ambition. He had heard stories from local guides about a queen's tomb that was cursed, one not found on any official map. The guides would not take him near it. They warned him that the desert near the site was always colder than the surrounding air, that no birds flew over it, and that the sand in that region made no sound underfoot. But Edwin was undeterred. With 2 laborers and a bottle of absinthe, he set off into the dusk. The first sign came when his compass began to spin. The second, when his lantern dimmed though the oil was fresh. The third, when one of the laborers refused to go any farther and turned back in silence. The other followed, wide-eyed, without explanation. Edwin continued alone. He found the tomb beneath a stone outcropping, half swallowed by the earth. It bore no name, only a single carving, a crowned serpent devouring its own tail, a symbol of eternity or of something trying to escape it. Inside, the air was cold and still. The walls were blank, save for small, almost imperceptible markings, like someone had written not with ink, but with their fingernails. The sarcophagus was unlike any Edwin had seen. Obsidian black, smooth and unadorned, save for a sigil at the foot. The eye of Ra cracked down the middle. He opened the lid. Inside was a body wrapped in linen far finer than anything from that era. Her hands were crossed not on her chest, but over her throat, and her face, though dried and shrunken, still bore the trace of something not at peace. Edwin took a pendant from the mummy's neck, a small, round stone set in bronze. Later, he would say he felt a click when he touched it, like a mechanism being triggered. That night, back at his camp, he dreamed of a woman walking backwards into a black doorway. When he woke, his tent was filled with sand, though it had been zipped shut. Within a week, Edwin was dead. The cause, according to doctors, was dehydration and exposure. But the photographs taken before burial showed something else. His skin had dried like parchment. His eyes were open, mouth slightly agape, and in the corners of his lips was dust, the kind found in tombs. The pendant was never recovered, nor was the tomb marked. But to this day, among the Bedouin tribes that pass through that region, there is a tale of the queen beneath no name, who waits not for worship but for return. It is said that her curse is not one of death, but of memory. Those who speak of her begin to forget their own names, their own lives. They begin to dream in languages no longer spoken, and eventually they walk into the desert backwards. The desert has a voice. It doesn't shout, it doesn't speak in words. It murmurs, slowly, softly, in tones of warning, and those who listen long enough hear more than just the wind. By the time the royal procession reached the Valley of the Kings, the sun had already begun to bend low across the limestone cliffs. Shadows spilled across the golden sand like long black fingers, curling around the ancient tomb entrances that lay carved into the rock. It was a place of death, yes, but also of secrets. Ramses II dismounted from his chariot with a solemn grace. His eyes were darker now, heavier. The funeral rites for Queen Isetnofret had lasted 8 days, a number sacred to the gods, but still he had not spoken her name. Not once, not to the priests, not to his sons, not even in prayer. The priests noticed, of course. In silence, they exchanged glances behind their ceremonial masks. The high priest of Ptah, aged and nearly blind, whispered to his junior, "To name the dead is to keep them from drifting. Without a name, she may return. Not as queen, but as something else." As night fell over the tomb site, a sandstorm began to rise. It came without warning, like an angered god exhaling through the valley. The workers dropped their tools. The donkeys screamed. Even the guards, trained and hardened from the Syrian campaigns, stepped backward, shielding their faces, unsure of what exactly they feared. It wasn't the wind. It was the sound hidden within the wind. Not quite a voice, not quite a scream, just a distant echo, something between a woman's sigh and the hiss of a serpent. By midnight, Queen Isetnofret had been placed within her sarcophagus. Her face was covered in gold, her eyes sealed with obsidian discs meant to keep her gaze closed. Her hands were folded across her chest, clutching the crook and flail, emblems of divine royalty. Around her, jars filled with her liver, heart, lungs, and intestines stood in a circle, each watched by a protective deity. But one jar was missing. No one noticed. Not yet. 3 days later, a guard was found dead outside the tomb. His eyes were gone. Not torn, not stabbed, just missing. His hands were folded across his chest in the exact position of the queen. Rumors spread like fever. The tomb was sealed early. Too early. Some said it was to preserve the sanctity of the queen. Others whispered it was to trap something inside. Ramses returned to Thebes in silence. His council dared not question his decision. But that night, as he lay in his private chamber, the one he once shared with Isetnofret, he dreamed of her. Again. Except now, she wasn't radiant. She wasn't regal. She was weeping blood, her mouth full of sand. "You left me," she said. "You turned away before the final rite." He woke choking, coughing sand from his throat. In the coming weeks, 3 more men died. Each had worked on the queen's burial. Each was found the same way. Hands crossed, eyes gone, lips sealed shut with what looked like mud, but wasn't. One scribe, driven mad, began carving symbols into his own skin. Not hieroglyphs, but something older, something no scholar could translate. Before he died, he left a message on the wall of his cell. "The queen does not sleep. Her name is unspoken. And so she walks. In a desperate attempt to restore order, Ramses summoned the oracle of Ammonius, a woman rumored to speak in the tongue of the gods themselves. She arrived blindfolded, her feet never touching the ground, carried by 4 attendants dressed in black linen. She asked for silence. Then she whispered, "The Ka has not passed. She is not in the field of reeds. She is in the sand, trapped between death and shadow." Ramses demanded a solution. The oracle answered without emotion, "Name her," but the pharaoh hesitated. For in Egyptian belief, to name a soul after death was to release it. And Ramses, perhaps out of guilt or fear, believed she must remain trapped. He refused. The hauntings worsened. Wells dried without cause. Statues of the queen wept crimson. Children spoke of a woman in white standing in their doorways at night. Even the Nile turned red for 7 days, an omen not seen since the plagues of old. And still, the pharaoh remained silent. But then, something changed. One night, Ramses descended into the deepest chamber beneath the temple at Abu Simbel, a room forbidden even to the priests. There, he opened a sealed vault, untouched for over a century. Inside, he found a scroll, not papyrus but leather, and not Egyptian but Nubian. The scroll told of a ritual older than the pyramids, a way to bind a soul permanently to its tomb. But it required sacrifice. And not just blood. It required a name, spoken backwards, under moonlight, while standing upon the heart of the one you loved. The next full moon, Ramses returned to the Valley of the Kings. Alone. The sandstorm began again, just like before. But this time he did not flinch. He entered the tomb, past the antechamber. The carvings on the wall twisted as he passed. Once beautiful depictions of Hathor and Isis now distorted, like faces screaming beneath the stone. In the burial chamber, he stood above the sarcophagus. He whispered her name, Tfonsetsi, backwards. The ground shook. From the corner of the chamber, a low groan echoed. Not from man, nor beast, but something older. Something beneath language. Then silence. He left before dawn. And for a time, the hauntings stopped. The queen no longer appeared. The Nile flowed clean. The temples stood calm. Ramses believed it was over, but he was wrong. He had spoken her name. He had performed the ritual, but he had not stood upon the heart of the one he loved, because he had never truly loved her. That night, the tomb cracked open from beneath, and a voice whispered once more across the desert, "You lied." The desert winds howled like restless spirits as the caravan pushed further into the western valley. Every mile carried them away from civilization and deeper into the secrets that the Nile had buried beneath sand and stone for millennia. Professor Linden's once clear excitement was now tempered by a growing unease, a sensation of being watched, not by animals or people, but by something older, something eternal. That night, as the group camped under a crescent moon, Jamil, their local guide, recounted a tale passed down through his grandmother's line, one that was never to be told during daylight. His face flickered with the firelight as he leaned forward. "There was once a priest," he began, "one who served the queen, not Ramses. His name has been erased from stone and scrolls alike. He was not a man of faith, but a man of vengeance. He believed that Ramses betrayed the queen, abandoned her soul to rot in the underworld. And so, he prepared something. A curse?" Linden asked, though he already knew the answer. Jamil nodded. "A ritual, forbidden even in the oldest texts. It was not just a curse for those who disturbed her tomb. It was a curse of awakening." Jamil went quiet, staring into the fire, as though the priest's spirit might rise from the flames. No one slept well that night. By mid-morning, the team reached the site. It wasn't marked on any map and had been partially consumed by the shifting sands. Only the edge of an old wall stuck out, worn, but still etched with cryptic hieroglyphs. What struck Linden immediately was the absence of any cartouches, the identifying marks used to name pharaohs and royalty. It was as if this place was meant to be forgotten. After hours of digging, they uncovered a sealed stone doorway beneath the sand. Dr. Hammond deciphered the inscriptions. "It doesn't say do not enter," she murmured. "It says do not awaken." The warning sent chills down everyone's spine. Still, they proceeded. When the stone was finally pried open, a gust of ancient air escaped, dry, bitter, and cold. Inside was darkness so thick, it seemed to resist the light. The first chamber was narrow, its walls adorned not with traditional Egyptian scenes of gods and the afterlife, but depictions of torment. Women with hollow eyes screaming into the void, priests with serpents coiling around their spines, a queen weeping blood while seated on a throne of jackals. This is not part of any dynasty I've studied," Hammond whispered, her voice hollow. The passage led to a circular chamber. In the center stood a black obelisk, small, unmarked, and deeply unsettling. Around it were bones, not of ancient royalty, but of recent intruders. Boots still on, tools rusted, backpacks mummified in dust. "This must be the missing German team from 1938, Lyndon muttered. One of the bones had something gripped in its desiccated hand. A notebook. Though the pages were brittle, a few were legible. "We broke the seal." There was a scream from below, like the earth itself howling. Smith lost his mind, began carving his own face with his trowel. "Something moves in the walls. We should never have come." That night, Lyndon dreamt of the Queen, not as she may have looked in life, but as something beyond death. Her eyes were endless black pools, her mouth sewn shut with golden thread. Yet still she whispered, "Free me." The next day, they discovered another passage, hidden behind an altar carved with jackal heads. The stone was heavier than expected. When it finally gave way, a metallic clang echoed through the valley like a scream. The corridor descended steeply into the earth. The walls were smooth obsidian, unnaturally polished. Their lanterns flickered. Halfway down, they found the remains of a priest, cloaked in tattered robes of purple and gold. His arms were crossed, clutching an urn inscribed with untranslatable glyphs. But one symbol repeated over and over, a circle surrounded by serpents eating their own tails. "This isn't Egyptian," Hammond said. "It's older, proto-dynastic, maybe even pre-human myth." The urn began to vibrate. "No one touches it," Lyndon said firmly. But that night it vanished. Hammond was the first to change. Her speech became erratic. She began writing strange symbols on her tent walls in black ink, symbols that matched none in their records. When confronted, she denied any memory of doing so. Then came the screams at night. She claimed the Queen was speaking to her, warning them not to go further. But by then it was too late. The next chamber was what Jamil called the Chamber of Bones. Thousands of human skeletons lined the walls. Some were ancient, others horrifyingly fresh. One skeleton was still in a fetal position, clinging to a rusted camera. A tattered photograph inside showed the Queen's sarcophagus, but not as it looked now. The lid had been removed. The Queen's corpse was sitting upright, eyes wide open. They hadn't even reached her tomb yet. And yet, she was already awake. A final inscription lined the archway at the chamber's exit. Jamil read it aloud, then recoiled. "What does it say?" Lyndon asked. Jamil's voice shook. "It says, when her name is spoken again, her soul will rise, and she will not come alone." They all fell silent, because the name of the Queen had been spoken, repeated, recorded, and now echoed through modern devices. It was no longer buried. It was alive. The storm began before dawn. It wasn't like any storm they had encountered in the desert before. There was no wind, no sand swirling through the air, no sign of an approaching sandstorm. Simply appeared. The air thickened, as though something ancient had awakened deep beneath the earth. The temperature dropped rapidly. At first, it was just a strange chill that brushed against their skin. But then it turned colder, so cold that their breath fogged in the night air. The sand beneath their feet felt unnaturally hard, as though it had been frozen. Lyndon stood at the entrance of the chamber, staring into the black void ahead. His lantern flickered violently, casting strange shadows that twisted along the walls. The others were already pulling their coats tightly around them, shivering uncontrollably. "What the hell is happening?" Hammond whispered, her voice hoarse with fear. "I don't know," Lyndon replied. But even he wasn't sure if he was lying to her or himself. They had ventured too deep. They had broken the rules. And now the curse was awakening. The bones of the priest still lay where they had found them, discarded on the stone floor. The urn was gone, but the faintest sound of scraping echoed in the distance. Far below the tomb, something was moving, scraping, crawling. Jamil was the first to panic. His eyes widened as he backed toward the wall, pressing himself against the cool stone as though the walls themselves might protect him. "I told you," he gasped. "I told you to leave." But Lyndon couldn't respond. His mind was clouded, his thoughts lost somewhere in the dark chasm of fear that stretched out before them. He turned to Hammond. "We need to go. Now." But it was too late. A soft, low growl reverberated through the chamber, echoing off the walls. It wasn't a sound made by any animal that lived in this world. It was something else, something ancient and hungry. The kind of growl that chilled your soul rather than your body. Hammond's eyes met his, wide with terror. She opened her mouth to speak but was cut off by the violent crashing sound that came from deeper in the tomb. Lyndon didn't wait for any further hesitation. He turned and began to run, his footsteps heavy and loud in the silence of the tomb. But no matter how fast he ran, the sound of something following them, something large, something relentless, echoed in the chambers behind him. It was only a matter of time before it caught up to them. The next few hours passed in a blur. Lyndon, Hammond, and Jamil stumbled through the dark passages, desperate to reach the exit. But no matter how hard they tried, the way out seemed farther and farther away. The walls grew tighter, and the air grew thicker, as if the tomb itself were closing in on them. Lyndon's mind was racing. He couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't just running from something, they were running toward something. Toward the very thing that had been waiting beneath the sand for centuries. The walls were lined with symbols now, symbols that hadn't been there before, new ancient markings. They twisted and turned, seemingly alive, moving like they were breathing in the dim light of their lanterns. And then, as if by instinct, they stumbled upon something. A door, a massive stone door, with carvings all around its edges, carvings of serpents, of eyes, of hands reaching from the dark. At the center of the door was a symbol, one they had seen before, one that now felt impossibly close, as if it were watching them. A circle surrounded by serpents eating their own tails. Lyndon didn't need to ask questions. He knew what this door was. It was the final resting place. It was the tomb of Queen Isetnofret. They didn't have much time. The growl was closer now, louder, reverberating through the walls of the tomb. Lyndon could hear it in his chest, like a drumbeat, like the sound of something alive, something ancient, waking up. "Isetnofret," Hammond whispered, her voice trembling. "She's here. She never left." Lyndon turned to her. "We have to open the door. Now." But the door was sealed, locked by a mechanism they didn't understand. There was no time for hesitation, no time for deciphering the symbols, for understanding the language of the tomb. Lyndon ran his hands over the cold stone, feeling for any way to unlock it. He pushed, pulled, scratched at the surface. And then, just as the growl reached its peak, the door moved. It opened slowly, as if the tomb itself were reluctant to let them inside. The tomb was vast, but it was dark. Darker than anything they had seen before. The air smelled of dust and death, but there was something else. Something foul, something that didn't belong to this world. The scent of decay, of rot, of time itself breaking down. And in the center of the chamber, sitting upon a throne made of bone, was Queen Isetnofret. But she was not the same as she had been before. Her body was preserved, yes, but there was something wrong about her. Her skin was cracked, her eyes sunken into dark hollows. Her mouth was sewn shut with golden thread, but her body was not still. It moved, ever so slightly, as if something inside her was struggling to break free. Lyndon stepped forward, drawn to her, and then the voice came, Not from her mouth, but from everywhere. "I told you to leave." It was a whisper at first, barely audible, threading through the damp silence like silk unraveling in the dark. But it did not come from lips. It came from the walls, the stones, the very air of the tomb. "I told you to leave." The sound did not vibrate in the ears, but inside the chest, beneath the bones. Lyndon froze. His feet, which moments ago had carried him across centuries, now felt fused to the ancient stone. Hammond stood several paces behind, hand covering her mouth. Jamil had dropped his satchel, eyes glassy. The queen, if it was still her, did not move. And yet the voice continued. "You broke the seal. You opened the breathless gate. The sand will remember." A sudden gust of cold swept through the tomb. Not a wind, but a vacuum, as though the room had exhaled for the first time in 3,000 years. Lyndon reached out, trembling. He didn't know why. There was nothing rational in his actions, nothing conscious. His fingers hovered inches from the throne, then froze. The queen's head moved, tilted, not by much, just enough to acknowledge his presence. The gold threads that bound her lips shimmered faintly. Jamil backed away, mumbling prayers. Hammond stared, transfixed, her lips forming words that never came. The tomb was awakening. They fled again, this time not with urgency but in reverence, as if retreating from a temple after glimpsing a god too closely. The corridor outside the queen's chamber was no longer familiar. The carvings on the walls had changed. The hieroglyphs now depicted not stories of gods and offerings, but scenes of judgment and silence. Lyndon brushed his hand along one of the images. A man being devoured by serpents. A woman kneeling before a scale where her heart was weighed not against a feather, but against a skull. And beneath the scenes, a recurring sigil. 2 blackened eyes beneath a crescent moon. "Have you seen these before?" he asked Hammond. She nodded slowly. "Yes, on the walls of Dashur, at the collapsed chamber under the bent pyramid. They were wiped clean, removed." "Why?" "Because it wasn't religion," she whispered. "It was memory, banned memory." The tomb moaned again behind them, a slow, wet sound like stones grinding beneath flesh. They didn't look back. Hours passed, or minutes. In that place, time folded. It was as though they were walking through layers of something denser than space. Folded history, malignant and restless. Jamil kept muttering. "She wasn't queen," he said at one point. "She was something else. They buried her to contain her, not to honor her. They sealed her with gold because blood could not hold." They came upon another chamber. It was different, round. The floor was made of polished hematite, cold and dark, reflecting their lantern light with an oily shimmer. In the center stood a statue, not of a god nor a pharaoh, but of a woman faceless, her head wrapped in cloth, hands bound in gold wire. Around her were 7 urns. Each was sealed with wax, marked with glyphs they couldn't read. "What is this place?" Hammond asked. Lyndon crouched beside one urn. His fingers hovered over the lid. "I think," he said slowly, "this is where they put the pieces of her." The noise returned. From the distant halls, through the vein-like corridors, came the dragging sound again. It did not rush toward them. It moved with patience, with certainty. It knew they would not leave. They could not. Jamil collapsed beside the statue. His eyes rolled back. Hammond rushed to him, checking his pulse. "He's cold," she said. "He's burning up, but his skin is cold." Lyndon looked around. "We need to find a way out. If this is a sealing chamber, there might be." He stopped. The urn he had touched was leaking. A thin, dark fluid oozed from beneath the wax seal. It smelled of myrrh and decay. Lyndon stepped back. His vision blurred slightly. The statue's cloth covering seemed to flutter, though there was no wind. Then came the whisper again. "Return what was taken." He turned to Hammond. "Taken? What did we take?" But even as he asked, he remembered. The amulet, the one they had found at the entrance, the one Jamil had begged them not to touch. It was in Lyndon's satchel. An old thing, black and gold, shaped like an eye with a barbed tail. He pulled it out. The air changed instantly. The statue moved, only slightly, but enough to send Hammond screaming backward. The bound hands twitched. One of the urns shattered. Jamil let out a high, breathless scream, then fell unconscious. Lyndon dropped the amulet. It hit the stone with a sound too loud for its size. The fluid from the broken urn flowed toward it, as though pulled, and when it touched, the entire room went dark. The lanterns died. The light was swallowed, not extinguished. Blackness enveloped them. In that darkness, Lyndon heard the voices, layered, hundreds of them, some sobbing, some chanting, and above them all, one voice, a woman's, soft, clear, terrifying. The sand does not forget, and neither do I. The desert winds howled like mourning spirits as the moon cast an eerie glow over the ruins of the forgotten temple. The excavators had long since packed up and departed the site, rattled by the bizarre incidents and the mounting tension. Only a skeleton crew remained now. Professor Marchand, Amal, and a small team of local workers paid handsomely to guard the camp. It had been 2 days since the last incident. The screaming, the dreams, the blood-streaked journal entries. And yet, no one spoke of leaving. Something had taken root in their minds, something ancient and patient. It whispered to them not with words but with presence. Through shadows that shifted where no light moved, and cold that seeped into bones despite the heat of the Egyptian summer. Amal had not slept. Every time she closed her eyes, the queen returned. In her dreams, the queen of Ramses did not speak, but stared. Her eyes glowed with a strange white light, not blinding, but cold and consuming. She would raise her hand, her mouth unmoving, her posture regal, and Amal would wake with a scream caught in her throat, her body drenched in sweat. She had once been a firm believer in logic, reason, and science. But now, she began to wonder if perhaps history was more than fragments of pottery and faded glyphs. Maybe it had a memory. Maybe it had teeth. The inscriptions deepen. Professor Marchand, obsessed beyond the point of rationality, spent every waking hour in the chamber beneath the temple. He barely ate, often forgetting where he was. His journal, once neatly organized, was now filled with scrawled notes, half in French, half in rushed hieroglyphics, often with blotched ink from trembling hands. The queen was not buried here by accident, he said one evening as Amal brought him a tin of cold beans. She was put here deliberately, entombed, bound. Bound? She asked, not wanting to know the answer. Yes, these glyphs, he pointed to the walls. They're not prayers, they're warnings, not written in the style of reverence. These were made hastily, almost in desperation. He showed her a new section he'd uncovered. A large figure, unmistakably female, was surrounded by priests. They were not bowing in worship, but holding rods, spears, and what appeared to be talismans. Below the scene, in cracked and faded paint, a phrase repeated. The queen is death. The queen is silence. The queen must not rise. What does it mean? She whispered. I think... He looked at her, eyes sunken, voice hollow. They feared her more than any man, more than any pharaoh. The return of the sandstorm. That night, the sand returned. Not as a storm, but as a creeping blanket that covered everything. It was unnatural. Not a wind, not a gust, but a slow, steady fall, like ash from a distant fire. It coated their tents, the tools, even the generator. But no wind blew, no movement stirred, and still, beneath it all, came a sound soft, persistent, a kind of humming, low and rhythmic. Amal followed the sound, past the tents, past the chamber entrance, to the far side of the excavation site. There, in the moonlight, was something she had not noticed before. A slab of black stone, smooth and carved with a single eye at the center. It had not been there yesterday. She approached cautiously, every fiber of her being warning her not to. The eye stared back, lifeless and carved, but alive with some invisible pulse. She reached a hand forward, trembling. Do not touch it. Marchand's voice came from behind her, calm but cold. She turned to find him staring at the stone. You feel it too, she said. He nodded. It's not part of the temple. It's older, much older, and I think it's waking up. The madness of the guards. By morning, 2 of the night guards were gone. The others could not remember when they'd last seen them. Their tents were still intact, untouched, nothing stolen. But inside one of the sleeping bags was a strange residue, gray and powdery, like crumbled bone or dried clay. One of the remaining workers, a man named Rafik, began muttering in his sleep. Then, while awake, he began laughing. He laughed constantly now, sitting beneath the half-excavated statue of the queen, staring into space, eyes glassy and wet. When asked what was so funny, he whispered, "She remembers us. She remembers everything." He would not say more. The blood moon rises. That night, the moon rose deep red over the desert, and with it came the dreams. Not just to Amal, but to everyone. They dreamt of being buried alive, of their mouths sewn shut by golden thread, of laughter echoing through pyramids older than time, laughter that turned to screaming, then silence. And in every dream, the queen stood at the end of a corridor, waiting, just waiting. Professor Marchand was the first to break. He entered the sealed chamber alone, carrying nothing but a chisel and his journal. When Amal found him hours later, he was kneeling before the sarcophagus, bleeding from the nose and mouth, staring at the ceiling. He was whispering something. "She forgives me. She forgives me. She forgives me." But when he turned to her, his eyes were white, completely white. She screamed. He smiled, then collapsed. The temple cracks. The ground trembled as the sun rose. Cracks formed along the outer pillars of the temple. Birds, unseen for days, suddenly took to the sky in a frenzy. Even the lizards and desert foxes fled. Amal made a decision then. She would leave. Whatever this was, it was not history. It was a curse, a story that had not yet ended. She packed what little she could carry, along with the most important journals, and made her way to the edge of the camp. But as she reached the last dune, something called to her. A voice, her own voice, echoing. "Amal!" She turned. No one was there, only the sand, the temple, and the eye on the black stone, now glowing faintly red. The sun had barely crested the horizon when Amal returned to the camp. Not because she wanted to, but because she could not leave. The sand dunes had shifted overnight, reshaping the entire terrain. The road back to Luxor had disappeared into an unmarked sea of dust and silence. Worse, her GPS and compass spun erratically. North became south, east bled into west, as if the desert had lost interest in direction. And so she returned, not because she was brave, but because whatever they had awakened did not intend to be left behind. A silence that listens. The excavation site was still but not abandoned. The workers remained in their tents, sitting, rocking, or lying flat on the floor, eyes open, unblinking. It was as if time had paused for them, paused somewhere unnatural. Only one person moved, Rafik. He was standing at the foot of the queen's statue. Someone had etched strange markings into his arms, circular glyphs that glowed faintly when the light touched them just so. He was smiling as always. "She spoke to me," he said calmly when Amal approached. "Rafik, we need to go. Now." He shook his head. "There is nowhere to go. You know this." "What did she say?" She said, "You came to bury me in words, but I remember the language before language." He looked at Amal then, and for a fleeting moment, something ancient peered from behind his eyes. Amal backed away. The mirror room. Later that day, a tremor shook the foundations of the temple. It wasn't violent but specific, like something had shifted deep underground. When Amal investigated, she found a fresh crack in the rear of the main chamber. Behind it, a narrow staircase led downward, spiraling into darkness. She descended alone. The air changed immediately, colder, damper, more oppressive. The walls were perfectly smooth, unlike the ancient stone of the temple. It was as if this lower chamber had been carved by something other than human hands, something meticulous. At the bottom, she found it. A room shaped like an oval, lined with mirrors. But these mirrors reflected nothing. Amal stepped in front of the nearest one and saw not herself, but a woman. Tall, draped in obsidian robes, face veiled, hands covered in golden rings that pulsed like heartbeats. Behind her, a stone city burned beneath a black sky. The queen. Amal stumbled back, but each mirror she turned to showed another version of the queen. In different eras, different empires, always with the same stillness, the same gaze. And then one of the mirrors cracked, just slightly, a hairline fractured down the center. Behind it, the queen smiled. The map that wasn't a map. Returning above ground, Amal grabbed Professor Marchand's journal. She flipped frantically through his notes until she found a sketch she had dismissed before. A series of concentric circles surrounding a central eye. At the time, she had assumed it was symbolic, a religious glyph. Now she saw it differently. It wasn't a symbol, it was a map. Each ring corresponded to a chamber. The outermost, the excavation zone. The inner, the sarcophagus chamber. Then the spiral stairs. Then something deeper. Something below the mirror room. Something still untouched. And the eye in the center. That was no metaphor. That was her, the queen, waiting. The language of bone. The night brought screams again, but not from dreams. Amal was awoken by the sound of bones clacking together. First, she thought it was the wind. Then, she stepped outside and saw them. Small figures made of bone and wire, crawling across the sand, skittering like insects. Tiny replicas of the queen, their faces etched crudely into yellowing skulls. They moved in patterns, forming circles around the tents, around the statues, and finally, around the stone slab with the carved eye. One by one, they bowed. Rafik watched from a distance, his body swaying gently like a reed in a current. "She is learning how to walk again," he whispered. "What are these things?" Amal asked, breath catching in her throat. "Language. She's teaching us to remember." The red chamber. Later that night, Amal descended again, this time beyond the mirror room. She found a crevice in the floor, a crack in the perfect stone. Slipping through, she emerged into what could only be described as a cathedral of red. The chamber glowed faintly, its walls carved in spirals and patterns that seemed to shift when unobserved. At its center stood an altar, not of stone, but of packed bone. Skulls, vertebrae, ribs, all fused together in impossible symmetry. On the altar, something pulsed. It was not alive, but it beat. Amal approached. Her footsteps echoed, despite the chamber's closeness. And then, a whisper. Not from her mind, but from behind her. "You were always going to return." She turned. The queen stood at the threshold. But it was not the queen of her dreams. This one had no face. Only a veil of glistening black that moved like smoke, like memory. Her hands were folded, and her feet did not touch the floor. She floated, or perhaps she had always been here, and reality had only now bent enough to see her. "You buried me," the voice said. Not from her mouth, but from the walls, the altar, the mirror in Amal's mind. "You gave me names, prayers, titles, but I was none of them. I am older than kings. I am the first silence." Amal couldn't speak. Her tongue had gone numb. Her knees buckled, and the queen moved closer. The veil lifts. The next morning, Amal awoke outside the camp. She did not remember leaving the chamber. She did not remember sleeping. Her clothes were soaked in red dust. Her hands were shaking. Something had changed. The workers were gone. Not dead, but simply gone. Their tents stood open, fluttering in a wind that had returned. Their footprints led away from the camp, then vanished into the dunes. Rafik was nowhere to be found. Professor Marchand's journal sat open by the statue of the queen. A final entry scrawled in jagged ink. "She is not a god. She is not a ghost. She is the end of meaning. I saw her face. I wish I hadn't." The desert air was still, but within the walls of the temple's subterranean corridor, there was a slow current, barely perceptible, but undeniably present. The torches, flickering dimly against the carvings on the sandstone walls, wavered slightly in that breeze, though no visible opening offered explanation. Amara moved ahead of the group, her torch raised high, casting long shadows that danced with every step. Karim followed close behind, his eyes sweeping the walls, where hieroglyphs showed scenes of offerings and ceremonies long forgotten by history. The further they went, the more disturbing the images became. Kings and queens knelt before serpents with human faces. Children were bound in ceremonial postures. And at the heart of it all always was the same woman, the queen. Not Nefertari, not any recorded wife of Ramses II. This queen was unnamed in the texts but unmistakable in depiction. Her hair braided with gold, her eyes almond-shaped, always staring directly out of the stone. "She's watching?" Amara murmured, barely loud enough for even herself to hear. "What did you say?" Karim asked. "Nothing. Just, let's keep going." They reached a fork. To the left, a steep stairwell descending into deeper shadow. To the right, a narrow hallway sloping slightly upward. Karim pointed left. "The air's coming from there. That's where we go." As they descended, the temperature dropped rapidly. The torches crackled louder in the cold air, a jarring sound in the silence. They reached the bottom of the stairs and found themselves in a chamber unlike the others, circular, with a domed ceiling and a central altar, carved from black basalt. Surrounding it were 6 statues, all female, all identical. The queen again. Karim approached the altar. It was covered in dust, but as he brushed it away, he uncovered symbols that were not hieroglyphs, not even Coptic. They looked older, Proto-Egyptian maybe, or something far more ancient. Amara stepped forward. "Do you hear that?" Karim froze. There it was, a whisper, faint, like silk dragging over stone. Not words, just breath, sound with intent. "Don't respond," Amara said sharply. "No matter what you hear." Karim nodded, but his eyes darted toward one of the statues. He could have sworn he saw it move, just a tilt of the head, the slightest twitch. The whispering grew louder. Amara began chanting. Her voice trembled, not with fear, but with effort. She wasn't reading from a script. This was memorized, older than language. Words passed from one priestess to another in secret. The whispers faltered, recoiling like smoke caught in reverse wind. Karim, heart pounding, moved toward one of the walls. There was something there, a mural that looked freshly painted despite the centuries of dust. He cleared more debris and found himself staring at an image that froze his blood. It was him, his face, unmistakable, drawn in profile, kneeling before the queen. And above them, written in those same unknown symbols, was a phrase. He couldn't read it, but deep inside he understood. "He has returned." Amara had finished the chant. The room fell utterly silent. Even the breeze had stopped. She turned toward him, pale. "It knows you." He nodded slowly. "I saw. On the wall. Then we don't have time." The altar began to hum. A low vibration at first, building into a deep, resonant tone that pressed against their ribs. The floor trembled. Dust drifted from the ceiling. And then, with a sound like grinding stone, the altar slid backward, revealing a hidden stairwell spiraling downward. Amara stared into the abyss. "That's the tomb." Karim lit a fresh torch and looked at her. "We go together." She didn't respond, just stepped forward and descended into the blackness. The staircase wound downward for what felt like hours. There were no markings, no carvings, no signs of any kind. Just the repetitive spiral of cold stone and the occasional drop of water echoing into the abyss below. At last, the stairs opened into a vast underground hall. The scale of it took their breath away. Massive columns held the weight of a chamber larger than a football field. Carvings adorned every surface. Unlike the ones above, these were refined, intricate, elegant. And again, everywhere, the queen. But here, she wasn't surrounded by worshippers. She was alone. She stood above all others, the central figure in every scene. Her eyes had been inlaid with obsidian, giving them an unnatural depth in the torchlight. At the far end of the hall, Raised on a dais of red granite was a sarcophagus. Unlike the others they had seen, this one was pristine. No dust, no age, as if it had only just been placed. Kareem's throat tightened. "We found her." Amara hesitated. "We shouldn't have." They approached slowly, the silence so thick it pressed against their skin. As they neared, they saw that the sarcophagus bore no name, no title, just the carved face of the queen, her mouth curved in a knowing smile. Then, without warning, the chamber shuddered. From above, a slow cracking sound echoed, like a fault line awakening. A column collapsed behind them, sending a thunderous boom through the cavern. Dust spiraled upward in massive clouds. Amara clutched Kareem's arm. "It's trying to bury us alive." But even as she said it, the lid of the sarcophagus began to move. It didn't slide. It lifted, as though raised by invisible hands. A cold wind gusted out from within, extinguishing one of their torches. Kareem relit it with shaking hands. Inside, wrapped in bandages of deep crimson and gold, was the queen. But unlike other mummies, her face had not decayed. Her skin, though pale, remained whole. Her lips were still painted, her hair still shone, and her eyes opened. Kareem stumbled back, gasping. The queen sat up slowly, bones cracking with the movement, though no decay marked her. She spoke. Her voice was not a whisper, not a scream, but something between. "You have come at last." Amara fell to her knees, trembling. No, no, this was not supposed to happen. Kareem, unable to move, stared as the queen rose fully from her resting place. She was tall, too tall, unnatural. "You, who wear the face of my betrayer," she hissed, turning her gaze on Kareem. "You will finish what you began." Kareem whispered, "I don't know what you mean." "You do," she replied, stepping onto the stone floor. "Your soul remembers, even if your mind does not." She lifted a hand, and the carvings on the wall ignited in blue flame, casting dancing light across the entire chamber. Visions appeared of a past life. Kareem as a high priest, a lover, a conspirator, and the queen, sacrificed by his own hand, buried in secret to contain a power too great to comprehend. "I cursed the bloodline of Ramses," she said, "but it was not enough. You must carry it again." The chamber pulsed with energy. The air itself seemed to burn. Amara screamed, "Don't listen to her. She lies." But Kareem felt it. The memories, the guilt, the familiarity. The queen stepped forward. "Bind your soul to mine once more, and awaken the gods of the black sky." Kareem looked at Amara, desperate. "What do I do?" she cried. "Remember who you are now, not who you were." The queen raised both hands. The ground split. A circle of symbols surrounded Kareem in brilliant light. He fell to his knees, unable to breathe. Darkness rose, and the whispers returned. The dawn in Thebes brought no peace. The winds had grown strange, dry, yet bitterly cold in the early hours, as if the desert exhaled something ancient and forgotten across the Nile. Priests in white linen cloaks moved through the temple corridors with whispers instead of chants. The statues of gods, immense, unmoving, seemed to watch more intently now, their carved eyes following those who dared walk beneath them. And at the edge of the sacred lake, where reeds once swayed calmly, silence had nested like a predator. In the palace, Ramses still dreamed in fragments. The queen, Nefertari's ghost, no longer appeared only in his sleep. There were now waking visions, half-seen glimpses of her veiled silhouette behind columns, her voice like wind brushing the stone. The healers whispered that the pharaoh had grown pale. They said he now refused pomegranate wine. They said he had taken to locking his chamber doors at night. But in truth, Ramses had begun to believe. He would never say it aloud. Not to the priests, not to the guards, but inside something had fractured. His certainty, once as solid as the pyramids, was now crumbling grain by grain. And still the whispers grew. They began in the southern temple, the one dedicated to Hathor. A low murmuring sound at first, like wind sweeping through sandstone. Then voices. Not one, not two, but dozens. echoing, reciting something old. A prayer? A curse? No lips moved, but the priests heard it. The old acolyte Menpes dropped his sacred oil lamp in terror, and the floor caught fire before the flames snuffed out in a gust of cold air. Another priest, barefoot, shivering, fled into the desert and was never seen again. Within a day, 3 more temples began to whisper. Ramses sent his guards, then his priests, then his own son, Setherket. Each came back changed. Setherket, once loud and defiant, now spoke in riddles. He would sit for hours, drawing endless spirals into papyrus scrolls, muttering about the queen's eyes and the gates that should never open. Ramses summoned the high priest of Ptah, an aged man named Bekanef. Bekanef had served 3 pharaohs before him and was known to fear neither gods nor omens. "You must seal the temples," Bekanef said coldly. "Not forever, but long enough for silence to return. There is something wrong, something beneath the stone." "But they are sacred," Ramses protested. "To close them would be sacrilege." Bekanef looked him in the eyes. "So is what now walks inside them." Still, Ramses hesitated. Sealing temples would draw panic. The people already spoke in low voices of Nefertari's tomb. There were rumors of jackals gathering near the necropolis again, of walls that bled in the night. Then came the letter. It arrived on a piece of aged papyrus, wrapped in twine, with a seal Ramses had not seen in decades. It was the symbol of the forgotten oracle of Jebel Barkal, far to the south. The writing was not in traditional hieroglyphs but in a hybrid script, old, foreign, maybe even older than the Nile itself. He had to summon 3 scribes to translate it. The message, when read aloud, brought silence to the room. "The curse has roots deeper than the tomb. The queen's soul is not in the underworld, but in the breath of the stones. She is awake. She remembers. She waits for the sealing of the 21st gate. If it opens, even Ra will weep." Ramses clenched the scroll in his hand until it tore. He knew of the gates, or rather, he knew the legend. 21 hidden gates beneath the Valley of the Kings. Not physical, not stone, but veils between worlds. The priests called them Narrated, the veins of spirit. Only one, they said, must never be found. The 21st, the one without a name. But if it was legend, why was it now coming alive? That night, the moon did not rise. Or perhaps it did, but it was veiled, choked behind thick clouds that coiled above Thebes like serpents. The torches in the city flickered blue. Animals wailed. Insects vanished. And somewhere deep beneath the palace, a door creaked open on its own. Ramses awoke to silence. Not peaceful silence, but the kind that swells the ears. The kind that waits. His guards stood stiff at the door, their eyes wide, their mouths slightly open. He called to them. They did not move. He rose from his chamber and stepped into the hall. Cold, breath-fogging cold. Then, at the end of the corridor, a figure. A woman. Not fully visible, her face obscured by veil, her outline blurred like smoke, but familiar. She moved without sound, gliding, not walking. He followed, not out of fear, not even love, but a strange, paralyzing compulsion. Down stone steps past sealed tomb doors, deeper and deeper into the ground, until they reached a door, not made of wood or bronze, but blackened stone, smooth like obsidian. Upon its surface, 20 marks, 20 gates, and at the center, a blank space. Ramses froze. "This is it," came a voice, not from the woman, but from the walls themselves, from inside his skull. It was her, and yet, not her. Older, colder. "This is the place where forgetting dies. This is the door your heart built for me." He stepped closer. The stone pulsed with heat. He reached out. "Stop," came another voice, this one real, human, from behind. It was Bekanef, the high priest, his old hands trembling with the sacred staff. "You cannot open it," Bekanef said. "You must not." Ramses turned. "She calls to me. She is not what you remember. I loved her. She is no longer yours to love." Ramses's hand hovered above the smooth stone. For a moment, the hallway held its breath. Then the door whispered, not words, a sound, 1,000 voices sighing at once. The black stone shimmered. A mark began to carve itself into the blank space. The 21st gate. And then the door began to open. The deeper they ventured into the sands of forgotten time, the less distinguishable the world around them became. The air thickened, the wind fell to whispers, and even the stars above seemed to hold their breath. Within the lowest layers of the tomb complex, a hidden chamber revealed itself, previously obscured from all known blueprints of the tomb. It was this room that the inscriptions called the Chamber of Sorrows, a place where time, reason, and the living self were said to decay. Elena, Professor Rahim, and David stood before the threshold. The doorway was marked not just with hieroglyphs, but with swirling, erratic carvings that looked almost frenzied, scratched in a way that suggested pain or madness. This room, Rahim whispered, was meant to remain closed forever. The three had come far past caution, though. The curse was no longer a legend they were chasing. It was a force they had awakened, and it had noticed them. They stepped inside. A dim, violet glow emanated from the walls. Phosphorescent minerals, perhaps, or something less natural. The chamber's floor was covered with fine black sand, and strange, low chanting filled their ears, though none of them spoke. In the center of the room was a pedestal. Resting on it, a golden mask. But not just any mask. It was smaller than a funerary mask, human-sized, and inlaid with lapis lazuli and obsidian. Its eyes, if they could be called that, seemed to pulse. What is that? David muttered, unable to look away. It's her, said Rahim. Not a symbol, not an effigy. That's her face, the queen's real likeness. Elena slowly approached the mask. The air grew heavier with each step, as though invisible hands were pressing against her body. She felt her ears ring, her heartbeat pulse in her neck. Then she heard a voice, but not with her ears. You've come so far, only to become me. Elena staggered back. Did you hear that? Rahim shook his head. David looked pale. No, Rahim replied, but I felt something like ice. The pedestal began to hum, and suddenly, the hieroglyphs around the room lit up, one by one, each line glowing a brilliant red. The script was no longer dormant. The curse was not passive. It had awakened, unveiling the past. They frantically transcribed the glowing text. Lines of incantations, warnings, and fragmented memories filled the walls. Elena deciphered them with trembling hands. She was imprisoned, she said aloud, not buried. Her soul was bound here, not just entombed, but contained. This entire complex, it's a cage. Rahim stepped forward, his voice shaking. And we've opened the door. The mask began to rise from the pedestal, slowly lifting into the air, suspended by invisible strings. It hovered, watching them, and then began to turn. Not by accident, by will. Elena screamed. David dropped to his knees. Blood trickled from his nose, and he began to mutter in a strange tongue. Elena! Rahim shouted. The curse, David's being taken. David's voice had changed. His lips moved like his own, but the words did not belong to him. The living forget, but we remember. We watch. We wait. Now, you will carry me. Elena ran to David and slapped him hard across the face. He fell back, gasping for air, the foreign language torn from his lips like ripped parchment. Then the mask dropped. It landed soundlessly but cracked the pedestal beneath it. The chamber groaned. A shift, a deep tremble in the foundation. And then, from the walls, emerged forms, figures, shadows with human shapes, etched in darkness, half-trapped in the stone. Their faces twisted, anguished, their eyes hollow. The Queen's guards, Rahim breathed. They're still here, the echoes of judgment. The shadow guards didn't move at first, but they watched. Dozens of them, silent, waiting. The glow from the walls began to fade, replaced by an ambient red mist that oozed from the cracks in the stone. This is not just history, Elena said, her voice barely audible. It's memory. The tomb remembers everything. A deep sound, a vibration, like an enormous heartbeat, echoed through the chamber. Then a gust of wind swept across the room, but there were no openings. And suddenly, the shadow guards did move, slowly, jerkily, like marionettes with tangled strings. They stepped out from the walls, not fully formed, half ethereal, half corporeal. David screamed and ran, but one of the shadows reached him. Its hand passed through his chest, and David collapsed, shuddering. "He's alive!" Elena cried out, kneeling. But his heart, Rahim grabbed her. "They don't want him dead. They want him empty." The queen's curse wasn't just death. It was possession. It drained memory, essence, identity. It made the living vessels for her rage. "We must seal the chamber," Rahim said. "We were never meant to see this." But how? The seal of her name. The wall inscriptions, glowing faintly now, spoke of a seal. A name. A true name. Her name is her prison, Elena realized. That's why the pharaoh erased it from history. Without her true name, she is lost. But speak it, and she rises. "Then we must write it again," Rahim said, "and seal her with it." They searched the chamber frantically, ignoring the crawling shadows. On the far wall, buried beneath centuries of soot and dust, was a set of glyphs, partially erased. Elena traced them. Her fingers bled from the rough stone. With every stroke, the chamber shook. The shadows screamed. She carved her name, Nidiank. The chamber roared. The queen had been named. And with the naming came the reckoning. Collapse and escape. The moment her name was completed, the air itself screamed. The shadows flew back into the walls, and the mask shattered into pieces. The red mist dissipated, but the ground, it split. A great fissure tore through the chamber, collapsing the pedestal and breaking apart the seal stone. Elena and Rahim barely escaped, dragging David's unconscious body with them as the tomb imploded behind. They emerged into the desert night, covered in dust and blood. The stars had returned. The silence of the dunes greeted them like a final lullaby. They had survived, but they had also remembered, and so had she. The wind howled like a mourning spirit through the narrow passageways beneath the sand. Deep in the Valley of the Queens, beyond the gilded halls and painted columns of remembered royalty, lay a cave once sealed and now trembling with awakening. For centuries it had remained untouched, until the curse, like a pulse in the veins of the desert, began to stir what should have remained buried. In the torchlit gloom of the tomb, Lucian stumbled over loose stones, his hand grazing ancient wall carvings, half erased by time. His breath echoed, shallow and fast, as he followed the barely perceptible markings left by the priests of long ago, cryptic symbols that spoke of one final resting place not on any official record. Back in the camp, Dr. Yasmin Salim's hands trembled as she held a brittle piece of linen scroll, recently discovered inside a hollow statue. The ink, though faded, was unmistakably clear in its warning. "She who was cast into silence shall not sleep in peace. Her tomb is not a resting place, but a prison. Let none unlock the silence, lest her voice return and demand what was taken." Yasmin knew now. This was not merely a tomb, they had unearthed a sentence. Punishment. A prison for a queen whose wrath was deemed too dangerous to pass into the afterlife unbound. As Lucian advanced deeper, the passage widened into a hidden chamber. The walls were lined not with hieroglyphs, but with scenes more ancient, more primal, less of reverence and more of fear. The queen was depicted with eyes hollowed, mouth sewn shut with gold thread, surrounded not by gods but by cowering priests. Something had gone terribly wrong in her burial, and then he saw it, a sarcophagus unlike any he had seen. Obsidian black, etched with warnings in languages not even Egyptian. It radiated a coldness that had no place in the arid belly of the earth. He stepped closer, and the air shifted. Meanwhile, Professor El Mahdi, stationed at the Cairo Museum, examined the royal records that had arrived from Luxor. At first, he thought them forgeries, mentions of a queen not recorded in official lineage. A woman titled only as the Silent One, or She Who Devoured the Sun. Strange tales of a second wife to Ramses II, one hidden from the temples, veiled during processions, her name scrubbed from obelisks. There were stories passed in whispers by the elders of Upper Egypt, of a queen who spoke with the voices of the dead, who could command serpents, and who vanished one night after a solar eclipse. She was said to have cursed Pharaoh himself, and in retaliation, her soul was sealed inside her tomb, where her voice would never again rise. The unease grew. Phones rang in the dead of night. The excavation team began reporting dreams, identical ones, of being buried alive, of golden needles and sewn lips, of a whispering voice that called from under the sand, begging, cursing, threatening. Lucian, determined but increasingly fearful, placed a trembling hand on the sarcophagus. Pulsed. He screamed. A vision seized him. He stood in the past, in a temple lit by flame. The queen, young, beautiful, terrible, stood before him, her eyes black as obsidian. She wore a headdress shaped like the crescent moon and sun discs. Her mouth moved, but no sound escaped. Around her, priests shouted incantations, drawing sacred seals in the air. She was dragged backwards, clawing the ground, her silent scream never ending. And then nothing. Lucian awoke in the sand. The chamber was gone. Or was it? Back at the dig site, Yasmin found her colleagues gone. The camp was abandoned, tents shredded by winds that had left no tracks. Only one thing remained, the broken seal of the queen's tomb. Yasmin turned, and in the shifting dunes, she saw her, the queen. Not flesh, not spirit, something in between. Her sewn lips hung in tatters. She was free. The horror deepened. Over the next few days, towns near the valley reported livestock dying overnight, their mouths stuffed with sand. Children vanished in their sleep. Tourists disappeared from hotel rooms, their mirrors shattered, the word "listen" etched in blood across the glass. In Cairo, El Mahdi suffered a seizure mid-lecture after reading aloud a newly translated passage about the queen. He awoke muttering the same phrase again and again. She speaks beneath the ground. Lucian and Yasmin reunited in Luxor. She had escaped the valley, but not the curse. Her voice was changing, lower, distant, almost as if two people were speaking when she talked. Lucian, now obsessed, claimed he could hear the queen at night, whispering in tongues that hadn't been spoken for 5,000 years. She was never truly dead, he said, just waiting. They knew what they had to do. The tomb must be resealed, not with stone but with ritual. They returned under cover of night, carrying scrolls, relics, offerings. Everything the scrolls said might appease her. In the final chamber, the air was thick and dark. Lucian began to chant. Yasmin stood beside him, clutching an ancient ankh carved from ivory. The ground shook. A voice filled the chamber. Not loud, but heavy, like wet sand filling your lungs. Why silence me, still? It was not one voice. It was many. The queen's face formed in the darkness, made not of skin, but of shadow and bone. Lucian fell to his knees. Yasmin stepped forward. She offered the ankh. The queen reached for it, and vanished. The silence returned. The curse, perhaps, broken, or merely paused. As they fled, neither saw the small carving behind the sarcophagus wall. It was newly made, fresh, a carving of two archaeologists, standing in awe before a shadowed queen. And beneath a single word, return, to be continued. The echo of the queen's voice still lingered in the air days after Yasmin and Lucian fled the tomb. Even far from the valley, their dreams were no longer their own. Each night brought visions of desert suns that never set, of mouths sewn shut in golden thread, and of a woman pacing in a stone chamber, her eyes burning brighter than any torch. In Cairo, Yasmin walked through the hushed corridors of the Egyptian Museum, clutching a sealed box that had arrived from an anonymous sender. It bore no return address, only a hieratic symbol scorched into the lid, an eye shedding 3 tears. She recognized it immediately. It was the mark of the Temple of Sekhmet. Long since destroyed, its high priestesses vanished into myth. Inside the box was a manuscript, papyrus blackened with time, but the ink gleamed fresh as spilled oil. Its title read, "When Queens Become Gods, the Forbidden Chronicle of Pharaoh's Silence." No such title had ever been catalogued, and it was signed not by a historian or a priest, but by a name no one had dared write in over 3 millennia, Anu-Ket-Re, the Queen. Yasmin brought the text to Professor El-Mahdi, who was still recovering from his collapse. He recoiled at the sight of it, whispering, "That name was not meant to be spoken." But Yasmin insisted. As he read the opening passage, his eyes darkened. When the gods turned their faces, and the pharaoh's heart grew hard, one queen rose with a tongue of fire. They feared her not for her magic, but for her truth. She could unravel the lies of kings, and for that, they tore the sun from her lips and buried her voice beneath stone. El-Mahdi spoke slowly. "This is not a myth, it's a testimony, and it wasn't written for the living." That night, Lucian vanished. Yasmin found his room empty, the walls scrawled in ancient dialects. Dialects Lucian could not have known. The last message he had left on his audio recorder was a soft murmur, almost drowned by static. "She's not just a queen, she's a record, a voice that remembers every betrayal, every silencing. She wants to be heard, and I think I want to listen." His GPS pinged once, from deep within the desert. Then silence. Lucian had returned to the tomb, but it was no longer as he remembered it. The entrance was gone, buried beneath an avalanche of sand that no storm had caused. Yet Lucian knew the way. The curse guided him now, familiar like breath. He walked for hours in darkness, deeper than before, into catacombs that no map had ever charted. The walls seemed to move, shifting in response to his steps. They whispered, not in warning but in welcome. He passed statues whose faces had been chiseled off, not defaced but erased. Forgotten beings, gods no longer worshipped, names too dangerous to remember. And finally he reached her, but she no longer needed a sarcophagus. She stood breathing, if such a word could still apply to her form, cloaked in robes of black linen threaded with gold, her lips no longer sealed but broken open, weeping sand with every word. She looked at Lucian, and she spoke. "You came, because you remember." Back in Cairo, Yasmin stared at the last line of the Forbidden Chronicle. It read, "When the 13th echo is heard, the walls will fall, and the listener will become the voice." She didn't understand, until she replayed Lucian's last recording. It repeated not once but 13 times, each loop clearer than the last. With every pass, Lucian's voice changed, deepened, until it was no longer his. It was hers. The queen had found her speaker. At the Luxor temple complex, a strange event occurred. Tourists watched in awe as ancient columns began to resonate. Not crack, not crumble, but vibrate. The air grew thick with pressure, and hieroglyphs long faded glowed faintly with a dull red light. People swore they heard a voice in the vibrations, as if the stone itself was trying to speak. And in the catacombs beneath the temple, a hidden passage collapsed, revealing a staircase that spiraled downward, far below sea level. Authorities sealed it, but not before one archaeologist read a line chiseled into the arch above the stairs. "She waits for the listener to ascend, not descend, ascend." Yasmin knew what was happening. She returned to the Valley of the Queens. She brought no team, only the manuscript, a relic from the Temple of Sekhmet, and her own voice. She called out, and the desert answered. The queen rose once more, half shadow, half memory, and Yasmin spoke the words written on the final page. "By silence you were bound, by silence you were broken, now by voice, I call you whole." A hush fell over the dunes, not absence of sound, but presence. The weight of 1,000 unheard stories, centuries of buried truth, filled the world like thunder underwater. And the queen wept, but not in grief, in relief. Some say Yasmin never returned, that she became the queen's mouthpiece, wandering ruins and whispering forbidden histories to anyone who would listen. Others say she vanished into the sand, her footprints stretching into the horizon, never ending. What is known is this: the manuscript vanished, The seal at the tomb's entrance reappeared, and beneath it, freshly etched, were 5 words. Listen, and remember my name. The desert wind no longer whispered. It howled. Outside the hidden sanctuary, sand spun like a great vortex in the sky, erasing stars, covering footprints, swallowing the world. And yet beneath it all, in the darkness below, the air was still, almost too still. A silence not born from calm, but from pressure, from something watching, from something waiting. Professor Halden had not spoken since the Queen's voice echoed in his skull. Neither had Miriam. The room around them was alive with ancient breath. Torches that were never lit flickered with an unseen flame. Murals shimmered like they were being painted in real time. And the black eyes of long-dead gods gazed out from every wall with judgment, with wrath, with hunger. "This is not a burial chamber," Miriam whispered, voice cracking. "This is a prison." Professor Halden didn't respond. His gaze was fixed on the great obsidian doorway ahead, an arch flanked by 2 colossal statues, their faces worn smooth, their hands stretched out as if pleading to block the way. The inscription above the arch had not been recorded in any known archive. It pulsed faintly in red, as though etched with blood still warm. Halden read aloud in a voice not quite his own. "Beneath the flesh of gods, where even time kneels still, she waits, queen of the broken light, the bride of the dead. Let none disturb her vigil." As he spoke the final word, the statues groaned. Their stone hands drew inward, not to stop them, but to open the way. The doorway cracked open with a moan that sounded too human. Beyond it, only stairs spiraling downward into ink. Miriam stepped back. "We shouldn't. Whatever's down there, it's meant to stay there." Halden turned to her slowly, his eyes not entirely present. "We've already disturbed it. We are already marked." Then he began to descend. The staircase was endless. Each step down was colder, older. The walls bled symbols, glyphs not chiseled but grown from the stone, like fungus, like veins. Some pulsed faintly, others moved. There was no torch, yet a dim crimson glow guided their path, as though the tomb itself wanted them to continue. At last, the staircase ended. A vast chamber opened before them, impossibly large for the confines of the earth. A black dome rose above, etched with constellations no modern eye could recognize. In the center stood a sarcophagus, no, a temple masquerading as a coffin. And around it they came, the silent guard, figures wrapped in burial linens, dried sinew stretched over bone, gold masks fused to skulls. They did not breathe, they did not move, yet they watched. Miriam trembled. Those are priests." "Not anymore," Halden murmured. "They are offerings." He stepped forward. The ground cracked with each footfall, but the guards made no move to stop him. It was as if they expected him, as if they had waited. The sarcophagus itself was unlike anything they had seen. Made of an onyx-like material darker than shadow, it was covered in symbols that shimmered with spectral light. At its base, a warning burned. To open this seal is to end the silence. Miriam gripped Halden's arm. "We came to study, not to awaken." Halden's hand hovered over the edge. "We're too far now. Knowledge is never asleep, it simply dreams." Then he opened it. There was no body, only a void, a sudden rush of air, as if the earth had exhaled for the first time in millennia. The chamber groaned. The guards tilted their heads in perfect unison. From the blackness within, a sound rose. Not a voice, not a scream, something older than both. It crawled into their ears, into their memories, into their veins. Halden staggered back, clutching his temples. It's not a tomb." Miriam backed away. "What is it?" Halden fell to his knees. Tears streamed down his face. "It's her wedding chamber." The vision came without warning. Miriam blinked, and the tomb was gone. She stood in a garden of obsidian trees, beneath a sky that bled gold. Before her stood the queen, not mummified, not dead, but alive. More than alive. Her skin was not skin. It was moonlight wrapped in shadow. Her eyes were hollow stars, And her voice came from behind the world. "You open what was never yours to see," she whispered. "And so, you will remember." Suddenly Miriam was the queen. No, she was in her. Prisoner of memory. She saw the past. The wedding had not been holy. It had been a transaction. A merging of divine bloodlines, not for love, but for power. Ramses had stood beneath the twin sons of Thebes, his face a mask of stone, as he took her hand and gave his vows. But she had known he would betray her, known his heart belonged to another, a mortal priestess he dared not name. And so, she had made a vow of her own, in silence, beneath the altar, a vow not to the gods, but to something deeper, something older. The curse had not been shouted. It had been sung softly, in the ancient tongue that even Anubis had feared. It bound her not to death, but to waiting, to dreaming, to becoming something more. Her burial was a lie, a ceremony for show. In truth, she was placed in a chamber carved by the dead themselves, guarded by those who had sacrificed their names to serve in eternity. And she had waited for the bloodline of Ramses to return, waited for his mind, his voice, his descendants to reach her. Now they had. The vision shattered. Miriam screamed, falling to the ground of the real chamber. Haldan was beside her, eyes rolled back, whispering in languages not yet born. The silent guard began to move, slowly, in perfect silence, stepping toward them, one by one. Miriam grabbed Haldan. "We need to go." He didn't move. "I said." He opened his eyes, but it was not Haldan who looked back. It was the queen. Through him. "Too late," she said. Then everything went dark. The temple was behind them now, and ahead lay only silence and sand. Neferura walked slightly ahead of the others, her pace measured, steady, like someone who had walked this route before in a different life. The air had become dry and sharp. Even the ever-present wind had ceased its whispering. It was as if the desert itself were holding its breath, waiting. Amon-Re's map had marked a specific stretch of dunes, ordinary to the eye, but sacred in the unseen. Beneath it, he had written cryptically, "Where the queen's heart was weighed, the sand still remembers. A judgment ground? A ritual site?" The words seemed older than even the temple ruins they had left behind. As the party reached the coordinates, the sand took on a different consistency. Softer, deeper, unnatural. With every step, they sank just slightly more than expected. The desert here was not merely desert, it was hiding something. "Stop," Amon-Re said finally, kneeling. He brushed the sand away with a cautious hand, revealing faint stone beneath. Not a floor, but a seal. He turned to the others. "We're standing on a lid," he murmured. "A lid that hasn't been opened in over 3,000 years. Mira crouched beside him. "How do you know?" "Because the curse is still intact," he whispered. They spent the next hour excavating the site, fingers raw, backs bent under the weight of centuries. Bit by bit, the seal emerged, carved from black basalt, etched with hieroglyphs that shimmered faintly in the setting sun. At its center was a single glyph repeated in a perfect circle. Isfit. Chaos. It wasn't a warning, it was a trap. Still, they continued. With levers and ropes fashioned from climbing gear, they pulled until the seal groaned against the earth, shifting slightly, letting out a breath of air that smelled of ancient incense, rot, and something metallic. Blood? A staircase spiraled downwards into total darkness. They lit their lamps. The light trembled. One by one, they descended. The passage was colder than expected. The walls, though carved by human hands, seemed reluctant to reveal their form. Everything was carved from obsidian-like stone, and in that darkness, even light felt lost. The air thickened. Time slowed. Mira led, followed by Amon-Re and Neferura. Behind them came the rest of the team, silent as shadows. Not out of fear, at least not fully, but respect. They had passed into something ancient, older than gods, older than names. Torches flickered against the damp walls, revealing scenes too disturbing to describe fully. Women veiled in shadows, hands held out in supplication to a single crowned figure. Her eyes glowed even in the carving. In each scene, someone knelt, then bled. "This is no tomb," Amon-Ra muttered. "This is a sanctuary." "No," said Nephura, eyes unreadable. "It's a prison." They came to a final doorway, its arch warped and covered in thick golden script. A language none of them could name, though it seemed familiar in a dreamlike way. The words shifted if stared at too long. Behind it, a pulse. Not heard, but felt. Like a heartbeat buried in stone. They hesitated. "What if we don't open it?" Mira asked, half hoping no one would answer. "Then she stays forgotten," Amon-Ra said. "But she's not forgotten," Nephura whispered. "She's remembered every time something is lost to the dark." They pushed the door open. The chamber inside was vast, far larger than it should have been, given the limited space they had descended. Its ceiling rose into impossible blackness, stars twinkling faintly where no sky could exist. The architecture was wrong, angles that bent and broke the eye. It wasn't Egyptian. It wasn't human. In the center, she waited. Not a corpse, not a statue, something in between. She sat upon a throne carved of bones and gold, her face half covered by a funerary mask unlike any ever discovered. Not of Anubis or Isis, but something else entirely. Something feminine, regal, and utterly wrong. Mira froze. The figure's eyes were open. "Is she alive?" Someone whispered. "No," Amon-Ra answered. "She is remembered." The room vibrated with a low hum, a resonance deep enough to rattle teeth. Nephura stepped forward, voice trembling. "You are Queen Nectari," she said. The eyes turned to her. "You remember me," she added. The queen did not move, but something about her shifted. The mask cracked slightly at the cheek. Dust fell. "You were once High Priestess," Mira said, stepping beside Nephura. "No," Nephura whispered. "I am her." The room responded. A gust of wind rushed inward. Torches died. In the dark, only the queen's eyes glowed, twin beacons of deathless memory. What happened next was a blur of sound and light. The seal above them slammed shut. Sand fell like rain. The walls screamed. Not creaked, screamed. As if something were waking from an endless sleep. Amon-Ra dropped to his knees, chanting words in an unknown tongue, his voice cracking. Mira held her ground, staring into the queen's face, demanding answers. But it was Nephura who stepped forward and placed her hand on the queen's throne. "Forgive me," she said, her voice no longer her own. "I was not strong enough." The queen's mask split down the center, revealing her face. And then, for a moment, time stopped. It was not a human face. It was not a face at all. The chamber collapsed inward. The team screamed, scrambled, ran. They found a side tunnel, narrow, suffocating, alive with glyphs that bled light. Mira pulled Nephura behind her, Amon-Ra bringing up the rear. Behind them, the throne room vanished in a thunderous silence. The tunnel led upward, impossibly far, impossibly fast. They emerged, gasping into the night, the desert stretching endlessly around them. Stars spun overhead like blades. The seal behind them was gone, buried, erased. No trace of the passage remained, except for the voice that followed. Not spoken, not heard, but known. "I am remembered." The sun dipped low beyond the cliffs of Deir el-Medina, casting the sky in hues of ochre and bleeding crimson. The valley was cloaked in long shadows, curling around the stones like slithering serpents. The air had turned sharp, almost metallic, as if the day's light had disturbed something ancient and resentful. Professor Leonard stood still, his boots rooted in the sand, watching as the last glimmers of daylight disappeared behind the hill. Beside him, Amal clutched her journal, pages fluttering in the rising breeze, eyes fixed on the fissure in the rock wall. There it was, the narrow split in the tomb's foundation that had appeared overnight, as if pried open by unseen hands. They had seen strange things before, but never like this. The ground had trembled subtly at dawn. Not an earthquake, but a shift. A warning. Something was moving below. "You're sure this didn't exist yesterday?" Leonard's voice was hushed. Positive, Amal whispered. I surveyed this wall myself. There was no break. Nothing. And now, she knelt down, holding her flashlight over the crack. A faint draft hissed out from the darkness like breath from a long-forgotten throat. Leonard's thoughts turned to the last inscriptions they had found just days before. Not from the 19th dynasty, but something older, much older. Writings scorched into the stone, the characters twisted, incomplete, half-words, fragmented warnings. She does not sleep. Stone does not contain her. Those who unbind her shall be bound. And now a tomb wall had cracked open. The air inside reeked of dust, decay, and something faintly sweet, like overripe fruit left in the sun. Amal's fingers trembled as she reached toward the opening, and for a moment Leonard saw something in her eyes, a flicker of awe or fear. Then came the whispering. It was not a sound exactly, not voices carried by air, but something more subtle. Thoughts not their own, intruding like insects crawling beneath their skin. Leonard gasped and turned away from the opening, his vision spinning with black spots. Did you hear that? He managed to say, staggering back. Amal didn't respond. She had gone still. Her eyes were wide, but distant, staring straight into the crack. The light from her flashlight had dimmed. Leonard grabbed her shoulder. Amal! She blinked, and the trance shattered. She stumbled back, hand to her forehead. It was like someone was speaking inside my mind. They were, Leonard said darkly. Or trying to. He reached into his pack and pulled out a small pouch of ground myrrh and natron, cleansing agents used in ancient rites. He began to scatter it around the entrance in a shaky circle, muttering the protective phrases he'd memorized from old texts. Amal watched him, heart racing. What now? She asked. We go in, Leonard replied grimly, but not like fools. We prepare. Beneath the tomb, the descent was steep and slick with dust. They lowered themselves through the crack into a sloping shaft, using rope and small footholds to descend into the cold, quiet dark. Their headlamps cast pale cones of light against walls slick with condensation. The passageway was far older than the rest of the tomb, a pre-dynastic chamber, untouched by scribes or preservation efforts. Symbols were etched into the stone here, crude, childlike in form, but unsettling. They seemed to twist when not directly looked at, and Amal found herself blinking too often, eyes watering from the strain. After 20 meters, the passage widened into a circular antechamber. The walls were lined with dozens of niches, each containing small clay idols, none larger than a fist. The idols had no eyes, only deep, hollow pits where eyes should have been. Some had broken limbs, others had teeth. They were left as offerings, Amal said, barely audible. Or maybe as guardians. Then they failed, Leonard muttered. At the center of the chamber stood a sealed door. It bore no markings, just a thin layer of blackened soot, as though scorched by fire long ago. Leonard approached it with reverence and dread. He raised a gloved hand and touched the center of the stone. It was warm. There came a soft click. Behind them, the wall trembled. The Queen's voice. The chamber beyond the scorched door was unlike anything they had encountered. Massive in scale, shaped like an inverted dome, it seemed to extend farther than their lights could reach. Obelisks floated, unsupported, in midair, levitating with slow, deliberate rotations. The air vibrated, charged with ancient force. In the center, a sarcophagus suspended between 4 stone plinths. The surface was translucent crystal, not stone, and within lay the form of a woman, perfectly preserved. Her skin was pale gold, lips tinted crimson. Her hair, long and black, floated around her like ink in water. Her eyes were open. Amal stumbled backward, bile rising in her throat. Leonard couldn't look away. The Queen. She was awake, and then she spoke, not with voice but with thought. A storm of images and emotions slammed into their minds. Sand and fire, a throne wreathed in serpents, chains of gold and bone, burial alive, screams echoing through the earth for centuries. Who unseals me? Who dares summon what was cast beneath eternity? shall bear what I bore. The plinths cracked one by one. The sarcophagus trembled. Leonard grabbed Amal's hand. We have to get out. Now. But the air had turned thick. Heavy. Like wading through syrup. Behind them, the door had vanished. The burial mirror. The floating obelisks began to spin faster, and the queen's body lifted slowly from the coffin, arms still folded across her chest. A halo of gold and black smoke surrounded her. Her gaze was locked on them, though she did not move. Her mouth opened not to speak, but to scream. A silent, psychic screech that shattered the air and pierced bone. Leonard dropped to his knees, blood trickling from his nose. Amal fell beside him, screaming aloud, clutching her ears. The walls around them shimmered, and then they saw the mirror. It stood alone, opposite the sarcophagus, a tall, oval slab of polished obsidian. Within its surface, reflections twisted, not their own but alternate selves. Older, weaker, broken, their eyes hollow, their limbs bound. It was not a mirror, it was a gate. The queen turned to face it. Through your vessel, I return. She pointed at Amal. The night had become a thick, heavy silence, only broken by the low, dry winds shifting through the dunes like whispers of ancient voices. The group's campfire had burned down to embers, its light flickering dimly across the edges of their weathered tents. No one slept. After what they had witnessed in the tomb, after the claw marks in stone, the vanishing of Kareem, and the discovery of the queen's unnatural embalming, sleep had become an unfamiliar stranger. Farida stood alone, wrapped in her long shawl, watching the horizon. Her eyes were fixed on the desert, though she saw little more than the dancing haze of moonlight on sand. Her mind was still replaying the moment she had looked into the queen's empty eye sockets. There had been something behind them, something aware. Dr. Sammet was muttering to himself near the ruins, furiously flipping through his handwritten journal, illuminated by a dim battery lamp. He had abandoned his earlier skepticism and was now frantic with theory, desperate to categorize their experience in ancient terms. Sikkim, not Ka, not Bia. No, it's something older. The professor's scribbling was interrupted by the low, dull thrum beneath the sand, so subtle it could be mistaken for wind. But then came a low vibration, like the purring of a buried beast. The sand around the entrance to the tomb began to pulse ever so slightly. "Did you feel that?" whispered Layla, stepping beside Farida. Farida nodded without looking at her. "It's awake again." Down below, deep beneath their feet, something moved. Not quickly, slowly, as though it had all the time in the world. As though it had waited millennia for someone to open the wrong door. They returned into the tomb at dawn. There was no discussion. Felt inevitable. The air inside was thicker now, with a strange scent, metallic and sweet, like overripe fruit. The walls seemed darker, the hieroglyphs more defined. Some of them now appeared rewritten, with lines that had not been there before. "Don't touch anything," Dr. Sammet warned, though his own fingers were tracing the strange new symbols. They reached the queen's sarcophagus, only to find the lid pushed open. Not by machinery, not by excavation tools. It had been opened from the inside. The linen inside had been disturbed, and the body was gone. "What did we bring back?" whispered Layla, eyes wide. Dr. Sammet's breathing became ragged. "It's not a curse. It's a return." Suddenly, Layla's flashlight sputtered and went out. The tomb plunged into dim shadow, broken only by the flicker of Farida's headlamp. Shapes moved along the walls, not cast by them, but independent, flowing shapes that glided without source. The light fell on a narrow passage they hadn't noticed before. "Was that here yesterday?" Farida asked. No one answered. They all knew the answer. The passage was tight and suffocating, leading them into a chamber deeper than any mapped structure. There was no ornamentation on the walls here. No gods, no pharaohs, only smooth, claustrophobic stone. At the center of the chamber sat a statue, 7 feet tall, black, faceless, carved from obsidian. It held its hands forward, palms up, as if waiting to be fed. Around it, dried offerings lay rotted, and at its feet was a name: She who sees through time and returns with thirst. Dr. Samet read it aloud in a hoarse whisper. This isn't a god of Egypt. This is something older. Something that shouldn't have survived dynasties. Farida reached into her bag and pulled out the queen's amulet, which she had taken without telling anyone. The moment she held it near the statue, a low hum began to build in the room. What are you doing? Layla hissed. It wants it, Farida said, her voice distant. Before they could stop her, Farida placed the amulet in the statue's hands. The chamber trembled. The statue's eyes lit with a faint, golden light. And then, a piercing screech echoed through the tomb, like metal tearing through bone. Came from behind them. They ran. They didn't stop until they reached the surface. The sun was high, but it offered no comfort. Behind them, the tomb had changed. The entrance was no longer visible, swallowed by sand and shadow, as if it had never been there. Where's the satellite signal? Dr. Samet snapped. We need extraction now. But their equipment was dead. Radios, GPS, even their watches. Time too seemed suspended. Farida sat apart from the others, her eyes unfocused, whispering something under her breath. What is she saying? Layla asked, approaching her cautiously. Farida repeated it louder. She is not buried. She was waiting. Then she looked up and smiled. Later that night, Layla dreamed. She stood in the tomb again, alone. The queen was before her, fleshless, yet not dead. Her body was adorned in royal linen, her eyes glowing with a cold blue fire. She reached out with both hands. You brought me back, she said in a voice that echoed through Layla's bones. Now I bring you forward. Layla awoke gasping, sand in her mouth. She was no longer in the tent. She was standing at the edge of the ruins, alone, and far below her, she could hear chanting. The sands had shifted once more. By morning, Layla had not returned to camp. Only a trail of shallow footprints, half covered by desert wind, led from the edge of the site toward the dunes. The others searched for hours, calling her name until their voices cracked from thirst. But Farida remained in the shade of the broken obelisk, silent, unmoving, her eyes fixed on a point in the distance. She hadn't spoken since the night before. Dr. Samet approached her carefully, his tone strained. Farida, you saw her last. Tell me what happened. Farida didn't respond at first. Then, softly, she whispered. The queen marked her. She walks with her now. Samet stepped back, suddenly uneasy. You mean, she's possessed? No, Farida replied. She's been chosen. The group dwindled by the hour. One assistant disappeared during water collection. Another was found muttering near the dig, hands covered in ash. The desert had begun taking them one by one, not with force but by seduction. A strange pull in the bones, a whisper only they could hear. It was Ahmed who first saw the shadow at midday. They had returned to the excavation site, attempting to locate the hidden chamber that had swallowed Layla. But the sands were restless now, shifting unnaturally, forming gentle mounds and ridges like ripples in a dark sea. Ahmed pointed to the horizon, where no dunes should have stood. Is that a structure? Dr. Samet squinted. At first, it looked like a mirage, a shimmer of stone beneath the heat. But slowly, an outline emerged. Columns, tall, broken, blackened as if scorched by ancient fire. A forgotten temple, rising from the desert like a reborn memory. We would have seen that before, muttered another assistant. No, said Farida. It wasn't here before. She is unfolding the land, reclaiming what was buried. They walked toward it, drawn like insects to flame. The temple was older than anything Samet had ever seen. It bore no hieroglyphs, no cartouches, no marks of dynasty or kingdom. Only a single symbol above its arch, a circle pierced by a vertical eye. Inside, the walls pulsed with heat, yet the air was deathly still. Columns stretched into darkness, supporting a ceiling far higher than the surface mound had suggested. The architecture was wrong, too large, too precise. built for something not human. The floors were engraved with circular runes that seemed to move when looked at directly. Time shifted strangely within the halls. Footsteps echoed out of sync. Shadows moved without light. They reached a central chamber. A shallow pool of still black water lay at its center, perfectly circular. Above it, a void. Not darkness, absence. As they approached the edge of the pool, Farida stepped forward. "She left this place in death," she whispered. "But the body was only a vessel. Her true self stayed here, dreaming." Dr. Samet held up his light. The water reflected nothing. No face, no ceiling, no flame. Just infinite black. Then it rippled. A pale hand emerged from the water. Fingertips long, skin stretched thin like cured parchment. Then another. Slowly, a figure rose, cloaked in tattered linen, its face hidden by a golden veil. The queen, but not as she had appeared in death. This was something deeper, older. She stood tall, impossibly tall, towering above them in silence. Farida fell to her knees. "My queen, I have brought them." The queen raised one hand. The temple shuddered. Samet tried to back away, but found his limbs numb. He couldn't move. He could barely breathe. The queen turned to him, and beneath the veil he saw nothing. No eyes, no mouth. Just an open space, filled with sand and stars. "You broke the seal," she whispered, though her veil did not move. The words were inside his skull. Samet gasped. We didn't know." "You unmade the silence," she said. "Now I return to unmake time." Suddenly, the chamber fractured. Walls cracked, stone crumbled upward, as if gravity reversed. The ceiling vanished, revealing a sky not of earth. Red, swirling, filled with constellations that had no names. And behind them, her form expanded. Not a woman, not a queen, but a shape of desert and void. A being made of memory and thirst. The assistants screamed, some running into corridors that no longer existed. Others fell to the floor, seizing, whispering prayers to gods that would not hear them. Dr. Samet tried to reach Farida, but she was already fading. Her skin translucent, her voice joining a chant that pulsed through the walls. "She is the eye beneath all thrones. She is the thirst at the end of every river. She is the wound that swallows empires." Then silence. Samet awoke alone, miles from the temple. There was no sign of the ruins, no sign of his team, just his journal clutched in his hands, pages torn and wet. The desert was still, peaceful, until he looked at the horizon. Far in the distance, on the dunes, stood a single woman, veiled in gold, watching him. Then she turned and began walking toward the setting sun. The sun never seemed to rise that day. Though the sky had turned gold and the winds had stilled, the world remained dim, as if the light no longer trusted the earth. Dr. Samet stumbled across the dunes for what felt like hours. His water had vanished. His compass spun uselessly. Every direction looked the same. An endless ripple of sand, curving away from him like waves of bone. But worst of all was the feeling in his mind, a sensation like a distant echo, as though he was hearing his own thoughts repeated back to him, but distorted, older, spoken in a voice not quite human. It was then he realized he was not alone. Atop the ridge stood a jackal, enormous, silent, its eyes reflecting no light. His body cast no shadow, stared at him. Samet reached for a rock, anything to protect himself, but the jackal did not move. It simply turned, slowly, and padded down the opposite side of the dune. Paused, looked back, waited. Samet followed. The creature led him to a place the maps never knew. A canyon carved into the desert, narrow and deep, its walls lined with stone tablets too eroded to read. Whispers clung to the air. The wind carried not sand, but voices, some calling, some crying, others reciting verses in languages long dead. The jackal stopped before a flat slab of obsidian, embedded in the canyon floor. There, carved with unnatural precision, was a single line in ancient hieratic script. Somehow, Samet read it clearly. The ones who forget are devoured first. The stone trembled, and then opened. He fell into a city beneath the desert, not buried by time, but preserved beneath it. No sand, no rot, just silence. Towering spires of smooth basalt, temples with gold ceilings, streets paved with black tiles that reflected not the sky, but eyes. The jackal stood beside him. Then it spoke, not aloud, but into Samet's spine, in a voice like thunder echoing through stone. You have breached her memory. Now you must remember what she lost. Samet blinked. The city vanished. He stood in a palace, surrounded by obsidian walls and golden braziers. Before him sat a throne, and upon it the queen, but younger, alive. She was not cruel, not yet. Her face was curious. Her fingers traced a scroll as she spoke with an advisor. A man entered, a foreign emissary, bearing gifts. He bowed low and smiled, and suddenly, the air turned cold. The queen's eyes narrowed. What Samet witnessed next was a betrayal, not political but personal. The man, whom the queen once trusted, spoke in riddles and prophecy. He offered her a vision of a kingdom eternal, untouched by death, guided by a god beneath the sands. She rejected him, and so he cursed her, not with death but with remembrance. She would never be forgotten. Her thoughts would never sleep. Her soul would wander in every grain of sand, every tomb, every prayer carved into stone. She begged her priests to seal her away, not to protect herself, but to protect the world from what she was becoming. And the priests obeyed. They killed her memory. They shattered her name. They bound her voice into runes and buried them beneath temples, never to be read. Samet returned to the canyon floor, gasping. The jackal was gone, but the obsidian slab was still open, revealing a staircase spiraling downward into a pit of stars. He hesitated only a moment, then descended. Each step took hours, or seconds, or lifetimes. Eventually, he emerged into a cavern of black stone, where the walls shimmered with carvings that seemed to change when unobserved. In the center, a platform of glass. Upon it lay Farida. She was unconscious, her chest rising gently. Her face was calm, serene, even peaceful. And beside her, Layla, but not as she was. Her eyes were gold. Her skin shimmered with desert light. She looked at Samet and smiled. She knows everything now, Layla said softly. And soon you will too. Then she reached toward his forehead. He screamed, not from pain but from weight, a flood of memories not his own. Lifetimes of dust and crowns, armies rising and vanishing, rivers changing course, languages being born, dying, replaced, a world reshaped by the queen's grief, again and again. And behind it all, the curse, not vengeance, not hatred, but sorrow so vast it cracked the stone beneath the Nile. Samet fell to his knees. Why me? He whispered. Why show me this? Layla's voice echoed. Because you are the last to remember. When memory ends, so does the world. Suddenly, the ground shook. The cavern split open. Light burst from every crack. Not golden, but white, pure, ancient. The queen had awakened fully now. Her temple no longer slept. Her city was no longer buried. The sand above exploded into the air, revealing towers and spires to the sun for the first time in millennia. And across the desert, others began to remember. Children woke screaming. Elderly dreamt of voices long gone. A historian in Cairo tore open an old scroll, realizing it was not a poem, but a warning. The queen's name was returning to the world, and so was she. Dr. Samet rose. Layla was gone. Farida was still breathing. He picked her up and turned toward the spiral staircase. Behind him, carved into the stone, a new inscription had formed. Still glowing, still fresh. The desert wind had changed. It no longer carried only the whispers of shifting sand and ancient echoes. Now it howled with something far more palpable, something alive, something watching. The night sky bore witness to a different kind of silence. One that listened, one that breathed. Within the tomb's deep heart, beneath the limestone ceiling blackened by the soot of thousands of torches over millennia, Layla stood motionless. Her torch crackled, casting dancing shadows that mocked her every movement. Behind her, the expedition team had thinned. Some had vanished without a trace. Others had gone mad. And a few, just a few, were still with her, though their eyes were empty now, as if their souls had been taxed for daring to walk in this place. The walls of the chamber glowed with an unnatural sheen. The golden cartouches of Ramses II, once radiant and proud, now shimmered with something darker. His wife's name, long erased from official records, now reappeared in blackened ink, almost charred into the surface. Queen Nebet-Tahira. Layla, came a broken voice behind her. It was Thomas, the linguist, his accent quivering. Do you see it now? She turned slowly. The shadows on his face were deep. His hands trembled, and blood stained the front of his shirt. Not from injury, but from his own bitten lips and tongue. He had stopped speaking ancient Egyptian 3 nights ago. Said it spoke back. Layla approached him cautiously. Thomas, it's almost over. We're close to understanding it. No, he muttered, clutching the side of his head. We are nowhere close. We've only unwrapped the first veil. Behind him, the sarcophagus stood open, not physically, but perceptually. The massive stone lid hadn't been moved in over 3,000 years. Yet all of them had seen it open night after night, in their dreams. And always, from the darkness within, she rose. The dream was always the same. A corridor lit with oil lamps that did not flicker. A woman in white linen, her face obscured by golden veils. Her voice, melodic and cruel, would echo without movement of lips. You disturbed my rest. Now I disturb yours. Layla could never move in the dream. She would stand frozen as the queen approached, not walking, gliding. Behind her trailed the sounds of bells, faint and distant, like a memory of joy turned hollow. Then the queen would lift her veil, and Layla would awaken screaming, always at the same moment, when she saw her own face beneath it. The camp had grown quiet since the last storm. Only 3 of them remained: Layla, Thomas, and Amira, the digs photographer. Amira hadn't spoken in 2 days. Her camera now clicked on its own, taking photos in the dark when no one touched it. They had considered leaving, of course, many times, but something held them there. Not fear, not even the promise of historical discovery. It was something deeper, obligation. Layla stood once again before the sarcophagus. A strange hum filled the air, as if the stone itself resonated with an inaudible vibration. The chamber was colder now, and quieter. I have to do it, she whispered to no one. Thomas didn't respond. He had wandered off into the side tunnel hours ago. He hadn't come back. Layla placed her hands on the stone lid, cold, unmoving, but the moment her palms touched it, her mind was flooded with visions. A palace made of alabaster, servants with hollow eyes, a throne room drenched in shadows, a woman standing at its center, arms outstretched, her crown twisted and blackened by time. Nebet-Tahira, you stole from me, the voice rang. Layla reeled backward, her breathing shallow. The room had changed. The carvings on the walls now depicted scenes they hadn't before. The queen not beside Ramses II as a consort, but seated alone, surrounded by skulls, her hands stretched to the heavens as priests wept at her feet. The curse wasn't one of vengeance. It was worship. She had been elevated, not damned. They found Thomas the next morning, kneeling before the statue in the adjoining chamber. His eyes were wide open, his mouth stretched in a silent scream. His skin bore strange patterns, like burned script winding from his neck to his ankles. Layla touched his forehead, still warm, but he was no longer there. She and Amira carried his body outside the tomb. The sky was choked with gray clouds, unnatural in the desert. The sun, when it appeared, was pale and sickly. I want to go, Amira said suddenly, her voice cracked and used for days. Layla nodded. Soon, that night, Amira vanished. Only her camera remained. The lens shattered. The film inside had already developed itself, Images of the queen in various poses walking through the tomb, looking directly into the camera. One photo showed Layla sleeping in her tent, and the queen standing over her. Now she was alone, and she wasn't afraid, because fear had become meaningless in this place. The air itself was memory. Time bled. The queen didn't just haunt the tomb. She was the tomb. Layla lit a final torch and descended into the hidden corridor. The map had revealed it days earlier, beneath the queen's ceremonial chamber. A forgotten path buried under centuries of sand and denial. It led to a single black door, carved from basalt, untouched by erosion. There were no inscriptions on it. Only one thing. A single handprint burned into the stone. Layla pressed her own hand to it. The stone groaned. The door began to open inward with a long, exhaling breath. What lay beyond was not death. It was presence. The air buzzed. The room was circular, its ceiling impossibly high. At its center, a throne, sculpted from the bones of animals, humans, gods. And on it she sat, Nebet Tahira, her eyes opened, to be continued in part 20. Layla stood before the ancient throne. The queen's presence was still there, silent, eternal, watching. Not as a ghost, but as something older, deeper. The air was thick, not with dust, but with memory. "You found me," came a voice inside Layla's thoughts. It was Nebet Tahira. "I wanted the truth," she whispered, "and now you carry it." The queen faded slowly, like breath into wind. A shard of black stone lay on the throne. Obsidian, humming with ancient power. Layla didn't want to touch it, but she did. Visions rushed through her. The queen's life, her betrayal, her rage. Cities burning, names forgotten, curses whispered beneath moonlight, and through it all silence. A woman erased by fear. The tomb cracked behind her. The desert began to reclaim it. Layla stepped out just as dawn broke. Behind her, sand swallowed the entrance hole. No one would ever find it again. When asked what she discovered, she only said, "Nothing, just sand." But in her dreams, the queen returned. Always watching, always waiting,